Okay, so I've rarely been so excited for a computer. Apple just announced 2 new Macs at their annual developer conference, WWDC. This is a creative channel, so I'm not going to cover everything that was announced or launched. I want to specifically talk about the M2 MacBook Air and why I think this could be such a game changer for creatives. Make sure you stick around to the end of this video if you're interested to hear my overall thoughts as to what's best about this computer, but also its negatives. So the M2 MacBook Air, let's start off with the new design. The wedge design is gone. This is now an entirely sort of flat with kind of soft rounding of the edges. It's very, very close to the design that we're seeing in line with the 14-inch MacBook Pro, the 16-inch MacBook Pro that's running my computer setup behind me. I'm personally a massive fan of this updated design look. I love the way the new MacBooks look and feel. I guess this is up to you in terms of how you feel about the wedge going. I know some people love that tapered edge. Personally, I'm fine about seeing it go, and it has allowed the computer to be thinner overall. The entire package comes in at just 1.13 centimeters and only weighs 1.24 kilos, which is literally just over half of the 16-inch MacBook Pro behind me, so that is genuinely pretty exceptional. I'm really excited by the form factor of this computer, and I expect it to be really liberating. It has allowed for a new screen size coming in at 13.6 inches. This is another one I'm a big fan of. I'm really liking the way that Apple is cutting down on their bezel sizes to maximize the amount of screen real estate in these updated line of computers whilst retaining that small form factor. This seems just like a win-win. You're getting an extra screen size bump while keeping the form factor as small as possible. We do unfortunately see the notch make a return. Personally, this doesn't bother me. I never really noticed this on my 16-inch MacBook Pro, and overall I would just always take the notch with the extra screen real estate. Like I said, I never really notice it. Inside that notch is an updated 1080p front-facing camera. Apple obviously knows that more and more people nowadays are spending time on Zoom, so that is obviously going to be a welcome change for anyone that works from home. The display is also 25% brighter, so that's another nice improvement over the M1 MacBook Air. Let's talk about the colors. Let's talk about how beautiful that midnight blue is. I think this potentially might be Apple's best looking MacBook ever. When they revealed this, like literally my whole Twitter feed was talking about how good this computer looked. So if you are looking to get that color at launch, I think you better be ready to do some very, very fast pre-ordering. It also comes in a new Starlight color, which somewhat looks like the rose gold color that Apple used to offer. And then of course, also the popular classic colors, space gray and also classic silver. Confusingly, the M2 chip, which of course we will talk about shortly, is also coming to the 13-inch MacBook Pro. This new MacBook Pro looks identical to the previous version from 2020, so that is obviously not the 14-inch and the 16-inch, that is the previous 13-inch version. Literally, it seems like the only real difference between the MacBook Air and the MacBook Pro is the inclusion in the Pro of a fan, which does slightly unlock an additional performance boost. The M2 MacBook Air does not have a fan, so it will be totally silent, but this just seems like a very, very weird product to exist in Apple's lineup. I don't know why anyone would go for the 13-inch MacBook Pro over the 14-inch MacBook Pro, especially when the 13-inch MacBook Air exists. In terms of battery life, Apple is saying you should get up to 18 hours of video playback, so definitely take that with a pinch of salt. From everything I've heard about the previous M1 MacBook Airs, the battery is decent and a strong performer and should easily last a full day on a charge unless you're doing anything intensive. I definitely expect that to be the same with the M2 MacBook Air. I have to say though, this is one of my biggest issues with Apple's battery claims. Apple says here, and I quote, "Work with more streams of 4K and 8K ProRes video with a high performance media engine. Keep working or playing all day into the night with up to 18 hours of battery life." You see this got this little 2 here. If we click that 2, it says the wireless web test measures battery life by wirelessly browsing 25 popular websites with display brightness set to 8 clicks from bottom. So this is obviously not testing the battery life performance, doing anything kind of relatively significant. As creators, we tend to do stuff which requires a lot of computing power for a lot of the day. This area for sure is going to be somewhere we're going to have to test a lot to make sure that Apple are standing up to the battery life test. In terms of my current MacBook Pro, this is the 16-inch version, as I've previously said. I reckon I get between 5 and 7 hours of video editing performance on a single charge, and that will kind of vary depending on how intense the projects I'm working at. If I'm working on a very intense project, it might be 5 hours, but anything more than that would be around 7. It's obviously not too bad. Most of the time I am working on a charger anyway. This will be interesting to see how the Air stacks up. Okay, so the performance is obviously what we're most excited about, and I think personally, what's like super exciting as a creative is that in a form factor as small as this 13-inch MacBook Air, we might be seeing some pretty unreal performance. I think that is genuinely game-changing as a photographer and filmmaker. So they have two variations. Both versions have an 8-core CPU, but you have also an option to upgrade to a 10-core GPU. Apple are claiming that it's 1.4 times faster than the previous M1 versions. It also says that they're up to 15 times faster than the Intel-based models, so Apple fully just slamming Intel here. You can see that this chart here is comparing it directly against the M1, and we've got 1.4 times expected performance, and this is a video editing comparison. So this would be like super interesting to see just how well the M2 chip actually does. This is obviously going to need a whole bunch of testing, but I think for everyone that isn't a creative person, in terms of people that don't work with apps like Adobe DaVinci Resolve or Photoshop or those types of applications, I think the performance on the M2 is probably going to max out what you would ever need. For me, we might need to hold fire slightly on this just to see how well the M2 does if you compare it to computers or chips like the M1 Pro that is inside my 16-inch MacBook Pro. But everything points to this being a very, very exciting computer. I personally like to think of laptops with a sort of portability to performance ratio. I think what's exciting about this machine is it's likely to be the best of the best in that regard. I'm thinking about how this computer could improve my day-to-day life as a videographer and photographer. The idea that I can take this computer on a shoot and it add hardly any weight to my camera bag, but it still potentially has enough performance that I could throw kind of anything that I would need to on a daily basis at it is genuinely really liberating. This is kind of my one and only complaint against the 16-inch MacBook Pro is just the fact that it is heavy and bulky. There are a lot of times where I just don't take this computer just simply because of its size. So we're on to pricing, and my oh my are we getting shafted here in the UK. For the US, the baseline model will come in at $1,199, which is obviously more expensive than the M1 MacBook Air previous versions that were priced at $999. Here in the UK, however, the price is actually more in pounds, so this is going to cost you £1,249. So that's obviously more expensive than the 1199. And if we run this through a currency conversion, that's actually more like $1,560. So who knows, maybe I'll fly to the States and buy this computer. If you wanted the 10-core GPU variant of the computer, which also comes with a bump in storage from 256 gigabytes to 512 gigabytes, it's going to set you back $1,599. And very excitingly, you can bump this up to 24 gigs of RAM for an extra $400. That will obviously bring the overall price to $1,999. And I have to admit, for a computer of that power with that spec with 24 gigs of RAM, that actually is pretty good. So wrapping up, what do I think is exciting about this computer for creatives? I think those 24 gigs of RAM are not to be underestimated. The fact that you could come out with a computer with 24 gigs of RAM for under $2,000, really pretty exceptional. In terms of performance to portability ratio, the fact that this computer is so portable, but potentially, and we will have to see how performance actually does stand up here, but the fact that this computer is touting to be so powerful, genuinely a massive win for creatives. And then obviously we just have the kind of form factor, the overall size, and the fact that there's 0 fans. This potentially is a very exciting computer for anyone that does creative work. In terms of the negatives, the biggest issues I see with this machine are previous issues or similarly previous issues that we've seen with the MacBook Air line previously. Most notably is the ports. This is only rocking a MagSafe port, 2 Thunderbolt ports, and a headphone jack. So that is obviously, you're losing 2 ports entirely from the MacBook Pro line. My 16-inch MacBook Pro comes with a HDMI, full-size HDMI port as well, so you're losing that one. You're obviously losing quite a lot of I/O and connectivity by choosing this machine over the MacBook Pro, but that is the trade-off that you make. It remains to be seen just how good the battery life is. I'm sure it will be absolutely fine for anyone doing light computer work, web browsing, documents, anything like that, but for creative work, we will have to remain to be seen. And then obviously, finally, it is a price upgrade. It is a bump over the previous $999 model, an additional increase of $200, which is not insignificant. And that means you have to think about whether it's worth buying this computer over the larger, slightly more expensive, but more powerful 14-inch and 16-inch MacBook Pro lines. And that does mean you're going to have to think about whether it's right to go for this machine or whether you should go for one of those 14-inch or 16-inch variants of the MacBook Pro. And if you're interested, I have a travel-specific review of the 16-inch MacBook Pro here.